Hi. After posting my last sound redesign, which included a lot of UI elements, I thought I'd make a video breaking down how I approach making these sounds and the kind of effects chains I tend to use. These ones are my favourite to make. The trick is just to take a synth sound with a lot of movement and high end, then run it through RX declick, outputting only the clicks. It results in these really nice wet sounds with loads of character and movement. I usually put some OTT after the declick, and I like to experiment with pitch shifting these around to see how the cadence sounds at different speeds. Let's see how this sounds. Delay can be really useful for adding tails to sounds that stop too abruptly otherwise, or adding tonality and adding a kind of sci-fi feel to sounds that otherwise might feel a bit too plain or grounded. Playing a synth sound with a really fast envelope through a very short delay, with a short delay time and high feedback, maybe even with a compressor afterwards to make the feedback even longer, can serve as a nice satisfying low layer because a lot of the transients are kind of happening one after another. Let's see how that sounds. Generally, I try to make these sounds as abstract as possible, but bringing in field recordings for some more natural weight or to extend the range of textures can work pretty well. I particularly like how Doom Eternal achieves this to make its unlocked sounds really satisfying. Stuff like this lock recording adds a nice mechanical feel. And using things like hyperdimensional phasing, as well as ring mod and pitch shifting, can help to make them sound less real and more like it's a user interface. Using white noise can be a really good way of making sounds readable, especially as with the other techniques I just showed, they don't always have a lot of bright high end, or they can have a lot of dynamic range, and noise can help fill in some of the gaps when you're layering them together. Instead of using standard white noise, or one of Serum's inbuilt variations, I like to use this method, where I take a waveform, preferably one that's more digital, but not super simple. I modulate the wavetable really fast and play a really low note with a high pass filter, so that only the crackly modulated high end comes through. Using a short tonal delay before the filter can make it sound more interesting as well. A similar technique I found is to play a really low sine wave, but not a perfect sine wave, like this analog BD syn from Serum, then using 2 OTTs to really bring out the high overtones from that are nice and harsh. I also cut the low fundamental afterwards, so it's just the kind of crackly high end that I'm keeping. When I start actually making the UI sounds, especially if I have to make a lot for a single project, I like to make a palette using all the techniques I talked about, then just experiment mixing and matching them in different ways, so that the creative process at this stage is a lot easier. Then processing at the end is usually just an EQ for frequency focus and cutting the lows, compression to glue the sound together, and then maybe a bit of subtle distortion to add some weight if it needs it. The most important thing, I think, is momentum and gravity, something that has a clear center point, which all the other parts lead up to and trail away from. Here are some examples. Kicks are great for signposting where the center is, and lets the listener know when your super important information is coming, because your UI sounds shouldn't have much low end usually. Another important thing is frequency movement and focus, so making sure that not all frequencies are present at all times in the sound. This could mean that your initial transient has high end, but the tail is more focused in the mids, or that a high noisy layer leads to a more powerful, low end heavy transient. A final point would be to consider both what the sound is conveying and what it will be fighting against in the full mix. You have more freedom with length and frequency content if the sound is exclusive to a menu where there isn't much else happening. But you have to be much more functional and efficient if the sound has to be heard over combat or dialogue. At the same time, making the sound evoke the right feelings in the player, like success, failure, or progress, is also important. Experiment with tones and harmonies, as well as cadences and frequency focus, to try and convey that feedback so the player understands what the game is telling them without even needing to see it. Thanks for watching.